Hey everyone, it's Peter with the Garden Family, and it is August 27th. Still pretty warm outside, but the days are starting to get shorter. And we are just about to head into a very beautiful time for vegetable gardening, the fall gardening season. There are many things that make fall a wonderful time to garden: cooler weather, less disease, less pests. But it can be a little bit difficult to get the timing right so you have a successful fall garden. So here are 5 tips to successfully plan your fall garden. So tip number 1 is to pick appropriate plants for your fall garden. Plants that work well in the fall are similar to those that work well in the spring. They need to be able to withstand a frost and a light freeze. Plants in that category include the brassica family, which are things like cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, and kale. All types of lettuce work very well in the fall, as well as frost-hardy herbs like cilantro, parsley, and dill. So once we've picked our plants, we need to find the right time to actually plant them in the ground. And there's a way to calculate this based on your zip code. Plants need at least 10 hours of daylight in order to continue to mature. So you can go to a website such as timeanddate.com, put your location in, and project forward to find the time when your daylight hours starts dipping below 10 hours. So for example, for us, that's right around November 16th, which means we have a little bit more than 80 growing days left before I need to make sure all my plants have matured. Now the nice thing about the fall, that date isn't the date they will die, they just won't really grow much anymore. So if you have a developed lettuce plant, for example, they can actually sit in the ground past that date, but you don't really expect them to grow much more after that point. So go ahead and look up your date and write that down. So tip number 3, we have to look at our seed packets and find the days to maturity for the plants we want to grow. So either on the website you ordered the seeds from or on the seed packet itself, it should show days to maturity. Now there is a confusion often with the number of days to maturity, because depending on the plant, that might be days from when the seed was started or days from when it was transplanted in the ground. Typically, if a plant is normally transplanted, such as broccoli, it's going to be the days from when it's transplanted. And for plants that are normally direct sown, such as peas, it will be the day from when the seed was planted in the ground. So looking back at the previous tip, we have approximately 85-ish days until our day length is so short that we don't expect our plants to keep maturing, which means if I transplanted my seedlings today, I would need to make sure they all were going to mature in less than 85 days. Now this often means you're starting your seeds in the heat of summer and even transplanting them when it's pretty warm out, such as it is today. And that brings us on to tip number 4. So tip number 4 is, in most parts of the country, planting in August is going to be very hot, and so you'll want to initially plant your seeds under a shade cloth. If you still have daytime temperatures in the 80s or above, you definitely will want to plant those cool, loving plants under shade. Our 12 by 4 foot raised beds use these hoops to hold our shade cloths. And I have a short video of how I made those that I'll put a link up for. In addition to planting under shade, you'll want to make sure that your plants are well watered and don't have any additional stress beyond the hotter than ideal conditions they'll initially be planted in. And that brings us to tip number 5, which is to remove the shade cloth as soon as is appropriate. Remember, the daylight is getting shorter and shorter, so we really want to maximize the amount of sunlight that the plants get without overheating them. So if you have any days where the daytime temperature is dipping below 80, generally that shade cloth is off. And initially, when temperatures are in the 60s to 70s, we only have an insect netting on those plants to protect them from things like cabbage moths. As we get later in the season, we transition that insect netting to a fleece row cover in order to preserve some of the warmth in late October and early November. I made a video previously covering some of the row covers we use for our plants, and I'll put a link to that. I hope those tips on planning your fall garden were helpful. I've got quite a few seedlings here I'm going to start hardening off because many of these cauliflowers require 70 or more days to mature. If you have any additional tips for others, please leave them in the comments below. And if you aren't already, please consider subscribing. Happy gardening, everyone.